Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Powers. I work for the U.S. Geological Survey based in Anchorage, Alaska. My background is in carbon cycling and vegetation mapping. Done a lot of work all over Alaska in the last 15 years, and now I'm serving as a science coordinator. So I'm going to start us off today with a talk about a statewide vegetation mapping initiative for the state of Alaska. And then I'm going to turn it over to JJ Frost. He's going to be presenting on behalf of some of the work that he and Matt McCander has been doing through NASA Above. So before I present, I'd like to turn it over to JJ to give a quick introduction.
Hey, thanks, Elizabeth, and good to see some familiar faces in the crowd here and some new folks as well. So yeah, my name is JJ Frost, and I am actually filling in for Matt McCander, representing a lot of work that Matt has been key in the realm of vegetation mapping. So we'll hear more about that here shortly. And we'll put it in the context of, what these data products are good for, which is a lot, and also how they're going to hopefully feed into the statewide Alaska vegetation mapping efforts. So, but I'm in, Matt and I both are at Alaska Biological Research in Fairbanks. And yeah, been involved in a lot of mapping efforts over the years in different corners of Alaska.
Thanks, JJ. Appreciate it. I'm looking forward to both of these presentations. So I'm going to provide an overview of the statewide vegetation mapping initiative, and I see there are a handful of participants today that have been very involved in the development of the statewide vegetation mapping initiative. And then I'm going to turn it over to JJ. He's going to be presenting on some NASA Above work. A lot of the work that Matt and JJ have been working on is feeding into the statewide vegetation mapping initiative. So he's going to talk more technically about some of the vegetation mapping remote sensing workflow that is going to feed into this statewide mapping initiative. So I will go ahead and share my screen. And I see that Lisa Saperstein, JJ Frost, I see Tina Boucher, and a couple others who are all members of the Alaska Geospatial Council Vegetation Technical Working Group. They've been involved in this initiative for years. So if at any point you want to speak up, feel free to jump in. So here we go. Are you able to see my screen?
We see it. Yes.
Okay, great. So as I mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Powers. I work for the U.S. Geological Survey, but today I am going to be presenting on behalf of the Alaska Geospatial Council. So for a little bit of background, let me see if I can change my, okay, there we go. The Alaska Geospatial Council provides interagency coordination between local, state, federal, tribal, academic, and private organizations to advance a variety of geospatial initiatives for the state of Alaska. The Alaska Geospatial Council has 9 thematic working groups, technical working groups, which serve as the background or the backbone of the AGC. So the groups work to identify gaps in statewide data and coordinate amongst stakeholders to advance mapping deficiencies in Alaska. So a lot of the lower 48 has baseline geospatial data that Alaska is often lacking. So let me move to the next slide. So the Alaska Geospatial Council stood up the Vegetation Technical Working Group. So the VEG Working Group functions as an advisory body that consists of multiple agencies and organizations that provide guidance on the development of geospatial data related to vegetation for the state of Alaska. In 2017, the group was stood up and charter was signed to address these deficiencies for Alaska. One of the overarching needs for the Vegetation Working Group is to improve the consistency in vegetation classification and mapping standards so that the vegetation inventory and mapping products can be integrated to develop a statewide product. So we worked together over the last few years to develop a suite of standards to develop a statewide data set and statewide products. So since the standards have been developed, we're working on a variety of preliminary projects to advance the statewide vegetation mapping products. Okay, let me see if I can switch the screen. So one of the reasons our group came together is because a variety of stakeholders through federal and state entities and academic and industry partners came together, recognizing the need for comprehensive statewide vegetation mapping products for land use planning and resource management. So we have a variety of federal and state entities that need to utilize vegetation mapping products for fire management, for restoration of mining sites, for resource management, whether it's timber products or for planning for oil and gas development on the North Slope, and also to manage wildlife and their habitat. And also for land use planning is a big one for trails and transportation and access issues throughout the state of Alaska. So these statewide vegetation mapping products will be very useful for a wide variety of uses. And also communities can utilize these vegetation mapping products to understand how there are changes in subsistence resource availability across the state. So currently there are multiple state and federal agencies, as well as private corporations and academic organizations that are working to actively collect and manage vegetation resource information. So this diagram shows examples of mapping efforts throughout the state. And those are the blue boxes on the left that represent inventory vegetation mapping. And then there are other initiatives to collect vegetation inventory data. So those are the green boxes on the right. So each box displays a mapping or data product with an agency that develops the project. So for example, on the left, the Bureau of Land Management and Ducks Unlimited have worked together to develop an earth map or earth cover vegetation mapping framework. The NASA above has funded projects to develop plant functional type and cover and also land cover products. So those are some of the examples of mapping initiatives. And then over on the right in the green boxes, this is plant inventory, so vegetation data collection. So for example, the National Park Service has an inventory and monitoring program where they collect field vegetation data. The U.S. Forest Service hosts the Forest Inventory and Analysis Program. The Bureau of Land Management has the AIM project, so assessment, inventory, and monitoring, and they are collecting vegetation and soils data throughout Alaska for long-term projects. So these initiatives are varied in both the scope and quality of the data that's being collected. So many of the efforts are regionally or administratively focused, and so they are not well coordinated currently. So for example, the efforts utilize different vegetation classification systems and then collect protocols and store data in different databases. So the statewide products, which we collectively refer to as AK VegMap, will be developed using these existing data sets and will incorporate new data sets as they become available. So these are all really important mapping initiatives, and our group is coming together to help coordinate across all these entities to then develop a statewide set of products. Okay, so next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, our Vegetation Technical Working Group has been working together to develop a suite of vegetation mapping and inventory and mapping standards for the state of Alaska. The first set of standards is required it's field data, minimum standards for field data observation. So that's if any independent project or research project, if you go out to the field and collect vegetation data, we set a set of standards that we hope that others will collect the data, and then we can include that data for the statewide into the statewide geospatial portal. The second set of standards is for general mapping. So these are standards to develop regional mapping initiatives that then can feed into one statewide initiative. And then the third set of standards is requirements to develop statewide geospatial products. So it's one implementation plan to pull in inventory and mapping data, and then it provides a kind of the process for remote sensing to develop statewide products. So as I'd mentioned, 8K VegMap is the name we're calling the Statewide Vegetation Mapping Initiative, and there are 4 main products that will be delivered through the Statewide Vegetation Mapping Initiative. One is a database for field observations. So the University of Alaska Anchorage has developed a statewide geoportal, and we've entered into data sharing agreements with a variety of federal entities to pull in a wide variety of field vegetation observations that will then be used for calibration and validation to develop the geospatial products. The second product is the update to the U.S. National Vegetation Classification. So this is the national standard for vegetation classification. And we use this classification system to develop categorical maps of vegetation. Then the third and fourth products are actually the geospatial products. So one is a continuous map of characteristics. So this could be the percent cover of a single species or a set of species such as willow or lichen. So JJ Frost will talk more about this. And then the fourth is then the categorical map of vegetation types. So this is the plant community types using the US NVC vegetation classification down to the alliance level. So I mentioned that the 8K Veg Map includes both the continuous maps of vegetation characteristics and the categorical maps of vegetation. So the vegetation characteristics represent what is present on the landscape using numbers, and the vegetation characteristics can be any field measured property. So, for example, this may include foliar cover of species and groups, such as plant functional types, the canopy height, or percentage of bare ground, and so on. So a couple of examples of how this can be used. So vegetation characteristics show what is present in numbers. So here this map shows the continuous cover, the percentage of alder. So the red presents like a higher percentage of alder cover across the landscape. Then a second example is what the vegetation looks like. So this is the classification. So the community type using the US National Vegetation Classification. So this example shows the birch, ericaceous, shrub, lichen tundra in the yellow. So these mapping products can be used for a variety of ways for both habitat management, yet land use planning, such as fire. So if we take a look at 2 different classifications, we can see that this lighter orange color represents a burned area in 2006, which is a birch and willow with wetter soil. And then the lighter color represents the burned site with moist soil. So they may have different burn characteristics. And then we can also utilize these maps for wildlife forage availability. So this map shows the percent of lichen cover over the landscape. And then finally, one last example is we can utilize, if we update these maps over time, we can get an estimate of landscape change over time. So this map is showing change in both deciduous shrubs on the left from 1985 to 2020, and then change in graminoid cover from 1985 to 2020. So we can see how there is a change in species composition over time. So to wrap it up, I just wanted to provide a couple links of where the data is available. So the vegetation standards are available on the Alaska Geospatial Council website. The field data repository is located on the akveg.org website. And then additional data sets are available in the links below. So just a quick summary, the Statewide Vegetation Mapping Initiative is essentially meant to be a flexible and coordinated effort across multiple entities where we are able to utilize existing mapping data to develop a statewide geoportal. So with that, I know I'm kind of coming to the end of my time. So I'd like to hand it over to JJ, and he's going to present on some of the work that he and Matt has been working on.
Sounds good. Thanks, Elizabeth. Let's see if I can't yet share. Okay. I get a
Good,
thumbs.
JJ.
You see the
We see
title
it.
slide? Excellent.
Thanks.
Okay, so great. Well, thanks everybody. So yeah, I am not Matt McAnder, but I work closely with Matt, and happy to follow up on what Elizabeth has started and talking about some of the mapping efforts that we've been involved with. Some of these efforts are complete and others are ongoing. And definitely want to acknowledge the contributions of others here at ABR and elsewhere as well. Kathleen Orndal, Logan Berner, Peter Nelson, and others have been involved in a series of different above projects led by myself and by Scott Getz down at Northern Arizona. And yeah, and then also contributions of others in agencies. We've heard from Elizabeth. Tina Boucher here has been involved in a lot of the data collection efforts that have fed into this and continue to feed into these efforts. And also some collaborators across the border in Yukon. We saw this just a moment ago. I just to emphasize the point again that there's these different types of map products. Some are continuous or quantitative and others are categorical. And we'll talk about some examples of each. Of course, all these products have applications of themselves and will also be useful in developing the Alaska vegetation map. So first off, and I doubled up my background and put it on the slide as well. A lot of y'all already know I like shrubs. But this first effort I'll talk about, which is complete, and you can access the data as you please and use it. But a categorical mapping, well, I'm sorry, a quantitative mapping effort characterizing the cover of plant functional types across much of Alaska and neighboring Yukon. And of course, if we distill vegetation out there into these functional types, we know they all respond differently to changes in climate, disturbances, and so on. So it's a useful classification to look at current conditions on the landscape and also understand how they're changing. And as we know, out on the landscape, invariably you're looking at mixtures of plant functional types. Of course, plant functional types, we'll look at a list of them, but obviously it spans the gamut from trees, canopy forming shrubs, and also dwarf shrubs and non-vascular plants on the ground. And oftentimes underlying typical thematic maps, we always know there's a mixture of plant functional types. And the mapping area, you see the number, it's a big number. I mean, it's a big portion of Alaska, basically all of Alaska except for Alaska Peninsula and sort of the Northern Pacific Maritime Zone, and then neighboring portions of Yukon. And, you'll see here we'll talk about some of the results in terms of different domains. So Arctic tundra, boreal forest, and then what we call Oro-Arctic regions, which are often sort of a mixture of forest and tundra environments associated with mountains. And you can't talk about vegetation and plant functional type distribution in Alaska without acknowledging the role of fire, particularly in the boreal. And so you'll see this sort of patterning of burns expressed in a lot of the map products for specific time periods, and also whenever you're looking at change over time as well. So, and then, a lot of the motivation early on for this work was associated with ungulates, and in particular caribou, and characterizing caribou habitats for herds in Alaska and Yukon. I think everybody in the group is pretty familiar with basic plant functional types, but there you have the groups that are represented in these map products. So ranging different trees, shrubs, graminoids, forbs, and what we call light macrolichens. So these are typically represent caribou and reindeer forage lichens that are very light in color, so they have distinctive spectral characteristics. You also note there are some plant functional types that are missing, primarily mosses. And a lot of this, it reflects, what's really tractable to map over large extents. And well, mosses, I suppose could have tried, but that might be some future work. So in this representation of plant cover, we're using the metric top cover. So this is essentially looking as a satellite or from an airplane or a UAV looking down on the landscape and what's basically forming the first hit, if you will, or the top of canopy. So that's what all of these plant functional type cover metrics are characterizing. And there are, of course, other ways to represent cover. This is just a quick look at results. You can see, I guess it might be useful to look at mean cover, and you can start to get an idea of what are the really dominant plant functional types as expressed in top cover metrics, which of course is going to emphasize the taller things, generally speaking. Quick look at some results. And of course, I didn't really talk too much about the source data. I mean, really, this is a Landsat-based product, so 30-meter resolution. And we can look at these results for different epochs. So 5-year epochs starting in 1985 through 2020. And of course, Landsat can give for us, these really nice statewide representations, in this case of conifer tree, mostly spruce top cover. And, that's a fantastic representation. But where Landsat also really shines, and you can look in your own particular corner of Alaska or Yukon where you work, is looking at the landscape scale details. So Landsat really excels at that, of course. Again, broadleaf trees, no surprise, obviously, most of the cover values, highest cover values are in the boreal. Shrubs, all right, and we know shrubs are just about everywhere. So you see these patterns of distribution and graminoids. And finally, lichens. So just one thing that's kind of interesting is if you look at the lichen distribution, you see these really high abundance values in Western Alaska. And as I know, as Lisa Saperstein's in the call, these are regions actually that have experienced a lot of fire in recent years. And when we look at the some of the summaries, just looking over large extents and the abundance of these functional types and as top cover components, that's one of the patterns that we see regardless of what region you're looking in, whether it's Arctic or boreal, is a general decline in lichen cover values. And in some cases, obviously, that can be driven by fire. But also in many areas by this pretty steep increase in shrub cover that we're seeing over large extents. And, obviously shrubbification has received a lot of attention in recent decades and lots of site-specific studies, different parts of the Arctic. So it's not surprising to see those changes in abundance, but still, I mean, those are pretty dramatic. And, we're seeing that by summarizing the functional type maps from the different epochs across Alaska. There's quite a bit of other things going on in here, but I'll move it on. And by the way, if anybody has questions, please feel free to interrupt me. Let's see. So we saw a summary of some of the change maps. So this is just taking the PFT top cover values from the latest epoch and comparing it to the mid 80s. And obviously we see in the red tones are declines. So it's quite vivid, really. I mean, you obviously see a lot of changes that are clearly related to fire and post-fire succession, but also particularly the graminoids plot is really striking in what we're generally interpret there is that's largely related to shrub increase. So it isn't necessarily graminoids going away, but overtopped by larger shrubs. I guess one comment, again, using the Landsat record, I know anybody who uses Landsat, looking at changes over time, particularly in Alaska, the 80s, the 90s were pretty sparse for data collection across most of Alaska. Nonetheless, there was enough data to support the mapping, but it's just something to always keep in mind, is, fewer observations in those earlier epochs. Let's see. So this work is done and it's out there. I've just put screenshots of the paper describing it, and then of course the link to the data set itself on the ORNL DAC. So this is work led by Matt, and I think it's fantastic. I know a lot of people are using it. I mean, I use it. We use it a lot. So and I guess some ongoing work. Obviously, there was a lot of, the volume of ground data that went into this is pretty considerable. But there's more ground data that we're bringing in, not just to also inform some of the ongoing work I'll talk about here in the last few minutes I have. So we talked about plant functional types, and of course you can define those, we can define those very broadly into broad groups united by physical or physiognomic features. But if you think about some of the potential applications for this, for example, ungulates, if you're interested in, for example, moose browse and that sort of thing, it'd be pretty useful to break down that deciduous shrub category into higher taxonomic precision groups, that are related to palatability for ungulates. So that's an ongoing effort that's right now is picking up speed as part of the kind of the phase 3 of the above initiative. And for doing this sort of thing, you have to dig deeper into spectral characteristics and so forth. So right now there's a lot of work happening across scales from UAV-based plant functional type classifications, which can tell you something about not just kind of taxonomic groups, but also related to things like canopy height, biomass, and also characterizing uncertainty, which is considerable in many cases. And now this is a big look over at the above domain that gives some idea of the volume of ground data, field plots that are informing this work, and also the resources in the way of airborne remote sensing, and AVIRIS in particular, hyperspectral remote sensing, which gives us a means to get into greater detail in some of these functional types at the level of species groups. Let's see, we probably don't need to see that again. Talked about the big takeaways in terms of changes to plant functional types and their cover, increases in shrub cover, which we see across all domains, and largely decreases in graminoid and lichen cover. Lots of applications, but in the interest of time, I want to talk a little bit about some ongoing work. Again, working generally at higher resolution. One, this is part of an ongoing above project that I'm leading in using the Maxar Digital Globe Archive in mapping, in particular, deciduous shrub cover in detail, using that archive and beginning to develop multi-temporal products. So again, to look at phenomenon like shrubification, using that growing archive of commercial imagery, using machine learning, and specifically implementations of convolutional neural networks is where we're at for the most part right now. But this is just a real high-level overview of how we basically allow the machine to learn using human interpretation. So you begin with a scene that's received some processing to something like surface reflectance, and then apply a k-means classification, which is then labeled by a human interpreter towards ecotypes, or a simplified ecotype classification. which we're currently focusing on is primarily shrubs. And, the idea obviously is to begin for small areas of interest and then expand that to larger areas, which for us is primarily Western Alaska tundra and forest tundra environments. Third dimension, so canopy heights, obviously it's really valuable to know top cover metrics and sort of a classification of vegetation on the ground, but then to be able to speak to the canopy heights, which are very key for some of the other applications of this mapping related to wildlife and a whole range of other studies. So that third dimension, this work's still pretty early, but this is an example looking along the Kuskokwim River near Bethel, very shrubby landscape along the river, in using training data and remote sensing data from G-Light, LIDAR, IFSAR, so lots of different ways of characterizing canopy surfaces and elevate heights. So there's just a sneak peek at some of these products, and you see some patterns that generally make sense with high canopies along the Kuskokwim. So looks like I am over 15, so we'll leave it there. Well, maybe not, a little more detail. So there you go. But yeah, I'll leave it there. Happy to take any questions or continue the conversation. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you, JJ. That was a really great presentation, and it ties in nicely. I know a lot of the methods that you and Matt have been working on feed directly into the statewide vegetation mapping initiative. So maybe we'll take a few minutes. We'll open it up to any questions for the Alaska Geospatial Council or for JJ. And then we'll talk briefly about the potential for a permafrost workshop. So I'll go ahead and take a pause and just open it up. If anybody has questions, feel free to type in the chat or unmute yourself.
There are two already in the chat too.
Okay.
Well, one is from Tina, who asks, Elizabeth, could you drop the links to the time series and foliar cover maps in the chat?
Yeah. Yep.
And
So those are in the presentation, and I think Meredith are going to send those out. So we'll just send out the presentation slides.
It will be posted as a link on the IARPIC webpage. However, it would be a PDF, so I'm not 100% sure. Let me check to see if those links will come through.
And then Izu asks, the moss cover, this is for JJ, the moss cover is missing from the plant functional types, question mark?
Yes, it is. I mean, I feel your pain. I like mosses. Mosses are a really key plant functional type, particularly if you're looking at, permafrost applications, for example, because very often they're highly insulative. So knowing more about moss, not just cover, I think, but thickness. I mean, these are kind of wish list items. So the reason why they are missing, it kind of represents a combination of just limitation in resources and also in focusing efforts on, I think, the most tractable types, particularly with top cover. Obviously, we know there's a lot of moss out there. A lot of it's hiding in the understory. So it is a tough one to get at. Might require a bit more, I suppose, modeling, you would say, in order to come to estimates of cover of moss, often in the understory. And then if in terms of where it does form top cover, lichens kind of took a lot of the focus because of their value to caribou. But yeah, I think of a moss map would be great.
And then there is an additional question in the chat. It says, I have a question for JJ regarding the fractional cover mapping. How do you address the water in bare soils? Do you mask them out when you do the regression?
Yeah, so it was hiding in one of the slides, a busy table that nobody would have noticed in there. But if we looked at, if you summed up all of the cover values across regions or what have you, for the plant functional types representing top cover, they wouldn't add to 100, and they would come fairly close. But the reason they don't come to 100, one is we didn't map moss, and the other is, we didn't specifically map water and bare ground. But but yeah, certainly all of those types were considered in the plot data primarily that went into the modeling. So yeah, I don't know if it's best to say they were masked, but they were, I suppose we would say they were masked. I mean, we didn't make an attempt to come up with standalone map products. We probably have them. But yeah, it was focused on the plant functional types. So the biotic component, if you will.
Thanks, JJ. And then as a follow-up question, it says, I read Matt's paper in 2017. The accuracy seems much higher than the 2020 paper. Why does this happen? And JJ, I know you're trying to speak for Matt, so I know these are tough questions. So if you're able to answer, we'd appreciate it, but no problem.
Let's see. So 2017, I think you're referring, I think that would be plant functional type mapping over the North Slope. So yes, that was a different effort. I would say, I mean, I honestly can't say I can't answer this with great certainty, but my sense would be higher accuracy in that earlier effort, partly just because the study area, although it was still big, the North Slope, it's still regional. So you're not spanning all of these different environments, treed, not treed, et cetera. That would, I guess, at a high level, that would be my explanation. And you're not dealing with confusion, for example, between deciduous trees and deciduous shrubs, except maybe in a few very isolated circumstances where you get riparian cottonwoods or something. So that would kind of make it a little easier, if you will. Mapping on the North Slope is, I mean, some of those plant functional types simply don't exist.
See, Ruby has a hand up. Oh. Ruby, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, first I want to say thanks for the presentation. It's a truly amazing mapping effort. It's such a huge area, so it's super cool to see. I was interested in learning more about your work to break down the deciduous shrub increases into different shrub genera, like whether you're basing that on like leaf spectral characteristics or just, it seemed like primarily height, or what sort of data and is going into that.
Yeah, I think, and this is ongoing, so suggestions are very welcome. But yeah, I think, well, just taking my background here, this is all Salix pulchra. It's very familiar shrub everywhere in Alaska. But yeah, I mean, it's, in this case, it's, this photo is an example of basically a monoculture of Salix pulchra, and you can go to different places in different Alaska landscapes and see suddenly, well, okay, this hillside, it's all alder. So what's up with that? So, there's definitely ways to get at those through everything from, spectral characteristics. It's always tricky. Willows, for example, there's so much variability in willows, no matter what characteristic willows you're talking about, whether you're trying to identify a species in the field or in the spectral characteristics of the leaves. So that's always a problem. But there's also, but you still have a signal there that you can work with. There's differences related to, say, phenology. And there can also be differences that are in their distribution that you can attempt to model through other aspects of the landscape. It might have to do with surficial geology or something like that, where you have other covariates of, I guess, shrub canopy composition that you can attempt to apply. So I've kind of threw a lot of things out there, but yeah, it's a sticky problem. And if you're working in a small area, maybe you can, to try to apply it over large areas. I mean, it is challenging, but we're attempting to do just that.
Looks like Hazel has her hand up.
Yeah, I do. Thanks. Thanks for both of the presentations. Elizabeth, I had a question for you about the sort of ongoing piece of the statewide mapping effort. So it sounds like there's been a lot of engagement from a lot of different folks to pull this map together. And I'm wondering how you all are thinking about like continuing this effort. Like, are those partners bought in? Is it really easy for that data to get updated and for this sort of map to be maintained, or is that a challenge that you all are foreseeing?
Those are all very good question. And yes, it's a big challenge for us. Essentially, the AGC, the Vegetation Technical Working Group, I describe as kind of a grassroots effort where we have experts in vegetation classification, remote sensing, we have land management entities at the table, and we're all trying to come together to figure out how to develop these statewide mapping products. So we've developed a statewide geoportal that is being maintained by the University of Alaska Anchorage. And so they are able to ingest a variety of data sets. So if there is a specific research project, or if an entity such as Natural Resource Conservation Services has a bunch of field plot data, we can ingest that, or University of Alaska can ingest that into their statewide geoportal. And right now, what we're working on doing, we're developing an implementation plan to have this become more of a long-term program with supported funding. So we're right in the process of trying to get this supported more formally, but we're just not quite there yet. So right now, we're moving forward on kind of preliminary projects, or entities come together and say, we want to map over our jurisdictional area, or for management of caribou habitat. So they're funding projects that help us advance this statewide initiative. So right now it's essentially collaboratively funded by a variety of entities and research projects. So there are, UAF, UAA, ABR, Fish and Wildlife, and other entities are all contributing to this, effort on kind of an individual basis right now. But we're working to get it more formalized, but it's a work in progress.
Cool. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So if there aren't any other questions, I see we have about 9 minutes left, and I wanted to take a little bit of time. The third item on our agenda after the presentations were to talk about an IARPIC coordinated workshop focused on permafrost related research. So just as a little bit of a backup, our working group, the Terrestrial Community of Practice, we are tied to a wide variety of deliverables related to terrestrial science. And one of the needs that was identified in the Arctic Research Plan and some of the deliverables in the biennial implementation plan are to advance research and mapping related to permafrost and terrestrial ecology. So permafrost disturbance, carbon cycling, fire. So we were hoping to host an IARPIC coordinated workshop related to permafrost, vegetation dynamics, and disturbance in Alaska. And most recently, the U.S. Geological Survey hosted a USGS internal permafrost related workshop in September. And it was a really, really great workshop where USGS researchers came together. We presented on a variety of different research topics related to permafrost. So we saw science topics or presentations related to microbial ecology, to carbon cycling, to fire disturbance, coastal hazards and erosion, and then understanding the implications for permafrost degradation and the implications for infrastructure development throughout Alaska. So it really was the first time that the USGS permafrost related scientists came together to network, share their research, and talk about how we can enhance collaboration on permafrost related science. So what we want to do moving forward is host a second workshop in Alaska, more broadly on terrestrial ecology, permafrost, disturbance, and vegetation. And then a big part of this workshop would focus on how to advance deliverables that are identified in the biennial implementation plan. So we're hoping to host this workshop in Alaska sometime in 2024. So I just wanted to open this up for discussion. We're hoping for broader participation. This is not just a federal agency effort. This would be coordinated through IARPIC, through the Terrestrial Ecosystems Community of Practice, the Permafrost Community of Practice, as well as the priority area that's focused on hazards and mitigating hazards. So that's just kind of an opening, and I just thought I'd open it up for discussion for the group. Is this something that you guys would be interested in helping organize or participate in next year?
Sounds like a great idea. Yeah, I would definitely participate.
Okay. I see Hazel says, sounds like a great idea. I have to jump off to start next call. Let's see here. A couple other comments. Jeff Curry from Alaska Department of Transportation would be interested in the infrastructure issues. And then Tina says yes to the permafrost workshop.
I saw
if
some
you are,
thumbs up too from people on, I think Lisa gave a thumbs up and Tinqui gave a thumbs up.
Perfect. So there have been some other permafrost related workshops or meetings in Alaska. So we want to think critically about kind of the purpose and the outcome, the desired outcomes from this workshop. And I think the difference between this workshop would be to focus on deliverables that are identified in the biennial implementation plan and how researchers and scientists and decision makers can come together to advance the set of deliverables that are outlined in the Arctic Research Plan. So I'm kind of hoping that can be kind of the focus of how we come together, and a great opportunity to share the work that's going on related to terrestrial ecology and permafrost and disturbance in Alaska.
And we have John on the call too, John O'Donnell, who's the permafrost team co-lead. And so, John, we wanted to talk with you and your team about this more too, to find ways that we can kind of all coordinate together on it. We're glad you could be here today, though.
Yes, and I'll also mention Miriam Jones. She's one of the co-leads for the Permafrost Community of Practice. She was at the Permafrost Workshop in September. She said she's been able to talk to her co-leads and the priority area for the hazards team. They're all interested in moving forward with this Permafrost Workshop. So I thought I'd open it up. If there are people that are interested in helping coordinate and facilitate this workshop, please reach out to either me or Liz Hoy, and then we can all work together on kind of brainstorming on next steps for this workshop.
Well, we're also, as we're reaching the end of our time, I also want to put an announcement out that our next terrestrial meeting will be November 2nd at 2 p.m., which is another Thursday. The first Thursday in November, and we're going to have representatives from a few archive centers, Arctic archive centers, to talk about data management, how machine learning and AI are part of data sets now, and thinking about how these different Arctic archive centers can kind of work together or have ideas that can be shared to help researchers access data in new and different ways. So we'll get the announcement out for that soon.
Excellent. And big thanks to JJ. Thank you for presenting on your and Matt's work. Very much appreciated. Really great work.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
We'll see you at the next meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.